When she gets in it,
What? Welcome back to the Philip DeFranco Show, your daily dive into the news. There is a lot we need to talk about and a lot we need to break down today, starting with this. I need you to understand that the prosecution of Nicolas Maduro is going to be a circus. Right following the invasion of Venezuela and kidnapping Maduro, he made his first appearance in a U.S. court yesterday. And there, he pled not guilty to the 4 charges that were laid out against him, including narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, and possession of machine guns. Right when he showed up to court, you had Maduro introducing himself as the president of Venezuela and insisting that he is a prisoner of war rather than a defendant. Right? And that's a key distinction that he made for a number of reasons. First, it sends a message and makes an argument that the raid on Venezuela was not a law enforcement operation, it was a military action. And by claiming to be a prisoner of war, Maduro is saying that his treatment should be dictated by international law and the Geneva Convention, rather than face the accusation of personal wrongdoing in a trial under U.S. civilian laws. And with that, it looks like Maduro's legal team, which includes D.C.-based attorney Barry Joel Pollack, is going to argue that Maduro was in fact detained illegally. But there, I got to stress, you have legal experts saying that it's going to be a very tough sell, saying that federal courts, quote, generally decline to interfere with the means of arrest. But that is also just one path for what has been described as an incredibly legally complex case. And so even more likely is that we're going to see Maduro's status as a head of state and an argument for immunity pop up at some point. Though even that could prove difficult for Maduro's defense team, because there's a precedent for the US government bringing the leader of another country to trial, but it's also pretty rare. But also like a lot of things happening right now are rare. But this case right here, it's being heavily compared to the early 90s prosecution of Panama dictator Manuel Noriega. Right, Noriega was also accused of participating in a large-scale operation to smuggle drugs into the United States, as well as being captured in a military operation in his home country. And in that case, Noriega's argument for immunity as a foreign head of state, it was shot down and he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 40 years in prison. And a big reason why his immunity argument failed is because he wasn't formally recognized as the legitimate leader of his country, which is also the case for Maduro. Right, the US, as well as a lot of other countries, they haven't recognized Maduro as the legitimate leader of Venezuela since 2019, when he was reelected in what was internationally considered a fraudulent election. But also here, I'll say it is not clean cut. You have some legal experts, like a retired prosecutor from the Noriega case, saying there's no claim to sovereign immunity if we don't recognize him as head of state. Several US administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have called this election fraudulent and withheld a US recognition. Adding, sadly, for Maduro, it means he's stuck with it. But also, you had some legal experts arguing the opposite, saying that Maduro has, quote, a much stronger sovereign immunity defense than Noriega did, especially considering that in the unsealed indictment, the Justice Department referred to Maduro as the de facto but illegitimate ruler of Venezuela. So there is a chance that the defense team could argue for even just partial immunity for Maduro's official acts. That will also be a hard sell for the defense, because Maduro is accused of facilitating the shipment of thousands of tons of cocaine into the US by providing law enforcement coverage and partnering with drug traffickers. So it's likely that the government's going to argue, hey, running a big narco trafficking operation is not an official act. But that also means that we're likely going to see that argument of immunity in any form being litigated all over again, and maybe all the way up to the Supreme Court. And really, that's just the tip of the iceberg regarding complications that this case might face. And while the structure will likely look similar to any standard criminal case, it's very likely going to be even slower than we're used to, especially considering that some of the evidence, it may come from intelligence sources or be classified, which means that the process of discovery or evidence shared between the prosecutors and defense team, it could take a long time. And with that, you had a law professor from Duke explaining, the government may not want to use any classified information at trial, but that doesn't mean that the government doesn't have an obligation to turn over some classified material potentially if it's exculpatory or otherwise is discoverable under the federal rules. There's then also the issue of witnesses, with one former federal prosecutor on a case against high-ranking Venezuelans explaining that drug trafficking cases can be harder to prove because of their reliance on witnesses within the drug trade itself. Saying you're going to have to get somebody in the room with him who says he knew about it, he allowed it to happen, or that he did something more. Which then also brings up a whole new issue of security. But regardless, it seems that the prosecution is very confident in its case, with several former prosecutors saying that the Justice Department would only move to capture and indict Maduro if they believed that the case was strong enough. And so at least for now, one of the big questions is whether or not this is going to go to trial. Where Maduro has pled not guilty, but there's also time to reach a plea agreement. And considering that he's potentially facing a life sentence for the conspiracy charges plus decades for the weapons violations, he might be driven to take that option. But then also, if this case does go to trial, it's definitely not going to be soon. You've got legal experts saying that with all the hurdles, a trial at the very least won't take place this year. And then while Maduro's being prosecuted in the US and you have people taking to the streets saying the dictatorship is over, the members of his inner circle, they just remain in power. And that even includes his interior minister and defense minister, who have both been indicted in the US on drug smuggling charges, or with the Trump administration offering multi-million-dollar rewards for information leading to their arrest or conviction. And then of course you have Maduro's vice president, right, his number 2, Delcy Rodriguez. And she was sworn in yesterday as the country's interim leader, even winning an endorsement from Maduro's own son, who promised his unconditional support, which is even crazier when you remember that she's also the currently preferred choice choice of the Trump administration, which may or may not be connected to the fact that she may be the leader that the oil industry wanted in Venezuela all along. You see, she's the daughter of a leftist militant who once orchestrated the kidnapping of an American businessman and died in 1976 after being tortured in prison by state security forces. And that was an experience that is said to have shaped her worldview and eventually led her to work in the successive governments of former President Hugo Chavez and then Maduro. And you have her former colleagues and U.S. officials describing her as a ruthlessly ambitious and Machiavellian political operative, with her then, over the years, working her way up to foreign minister and then economic and finance minister. And then in 2024, after Maduro's widely contested re-election, she was named Minister of Petroleum and Hydrocarbons, putting her in charge of the national oil company, a position where she apparently made a very, very big impression. And you had Bloomberg reporting that executives, lawyers, and investors tied to the oil industry all made the case to the White House that she was the person to replace Maduro. Right? And specifically, according to reports, she impressed them by navigating Venezuela's industry through international sanctions, economic pressures, and internal mismanagement. Right? And it's led many of these people to believe that she could stabilize Venezuela's economy and pave the way for American business interests faster and more effectively than someone like Maria Corina Machado, the country's opposition leader. And so in addition to that thinking, you had Trump's inner circle apparently basing their decision on factors such as a classified CIA intelligence analysis that looked at what might happen if Maduro was no longer president. Right? In that report, it determined that members of Maduro's regime, including Rodriguez, would have the best chance of facilitating a stable transition. Right? Whereas Machado or Edmundo Gonzalez, who's widely seen as the actual winner of their 2024 election, would have a harder time due to greater pushback from pro-regime security services, drug trafficking networks, and political opponents. Though notably here, I'll say, reports said that Trump also had another reason for not wanting to work with them. You see, during Trump's first term, his maximum pressure sanctions campaign, along with other diplomatic efforts, they were aimed at creating the conditions for Venezuela's opposition to rise up and remove Maduro from power. But obviously, that just didn't happen. And according to Juan Cruz, who served as the top White House official handling Latin American policy at the time, Trump blamed the opposition, saying Trump sees them as losers as they failed to deliver, and adding it's an opposition that he sees as unimpressive and having come up short, so why would you just turn it over to them? Right? And while she has been trying to work Trump last night, to many, she just kind of debased herself, even offering to share her Nobel Peace Prize with him. Though in addition to that, you also had her going after Delcy Rodriguez, among other things, calling her the architect of the Maduro government's repression and saying that she just can't be trusted. And while you can find, mixed reporting about the exact role that she played, it's true that she was by his side as he ordered what has really been described as the most aggressive wave of repression that the country has seen in the aftermath of the contested 2024 election. And now, as she's taking over, there are concerns that a new wave of repression has begun. Just yesterday, Venezuelan authorities detained at least 14 members of the news media, according to the country's main union for journalists and media employees. They also said that at least some of them had their phones confiscated and thoroughly searched, including contacts, conversations, voice notes, Instagram accounts, emails, and documents. One even actually got deported. Also, they've got heavily armed security forces and pro-government motorcycle gangs known as colectivos roaming the capital, reportedly stopping drivers at times and checking their phones. A move that has been described as clearly intended to reinforce the government's internal repression scheme and prevent popular mobilizations through fear. But that also might not be a problem for this White House. Right? Trump is now claiming that the U.S. oil industry could be up and running with increased operations in Venezuela within 18 months, and the only way that there's a chance of that happening is with some stability. And so Trump, he's expressed his openness to attacking Venezuela again and even sending troops into the country to keep it on track, with one source even telling Politico that the administration ultimately believes that Rodriguez is on a short leash and is confident they can whip her in whatever direction they want before they dispose of her and move on. And with that, in addition to opening the door to U.S. companies, Trump reportedly has a list of at least 3 major demands for Rodriguez. 1, cracking down on the flow of drugs. 2, kicking out Iranian, Cuban, and other operatives of countries or networks hostile to Washington. And 3, stopping the sale of oil to U.S. adversaries. Also, I'll say it's been reported that the U.S. is asking that Americans held prisoner in the country be released. But also, people familiar with the Trump team's discussions have reportedly said that they weren't aware of any demand that other political prisoners be freed. And actually, the lack of such a demand there, it worries some and even Republican foreign policy circles who fear the U.S. won't follow through on efforts to bring about new leadership. Right? Because while U.S. officials reportedly expect Rodriguez to eventually facilitate free elections and step aside, that's apparently a much lower priority. Even Trump himself saying that there's no way that elections could be held anytime soon, saying we have to fix the country first. And with that, you've had White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller trying to bridge the gap between Trump's claims that the U.S. will be running and in charge of Venezuela and Secretary of State Marco Rubio's explanation that the U.S. will just be applying leverage.
We have the United States military stationed outside the country. We set the terms and conditions. We have a complete embargo on all of their oil and their ability to do commerce. So for them to do commerce, they need our permission. For them to be able to run an economy, they need our permission. So the United States is in charge. The United States is running the country.
And then in response to that, you had the likes of Senator Bernie Sanders saying that Mr. Miller gave a very good definition of imperialism. But, with all that, like we talked about yesterday, this isn't just about Venezuela. Colombia, Mexico, and Cuba, they've all been named, but maybe the most shocking threats have been made against Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, which very notably isn't just strategically located, but also has huge amounts of rare earth minerals used for making batteries, cell phones, electric vehicles, and other high-tech products. Right? And some scientists even believe that parts of the country might hold massive oil and gas deposits. Though notably, Greenland's government gave up trying to access it due to environmental risks and concerns about commercial viability. But as far as the Trump team, they've just been getting more and more aggressive in their rhetoric. Or with Stephen Miller, for example, essentially claiming in that interview that Greenland, and by extension, its resources rightfully belong to the United States, and that the Trump administration could seize the territory if it wanted, while also arguing nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland. And all of that is, we know that Trump has refused to rule out military action, and it's far from clear that Denmark and its allies wouldn't defend its territory. And with all this, you had the Danish PM warning that a US attack would lead to the end of NATO, saying the international community, as we know it, democratic rules of the game, NATO, the world's strongest defensive alliance, all of that would collapse if one NATO country chose to attack another. But there I'll say, even if it doesn't get to that point, Trump's action in Venezuela, it's already sending a message that the rules of the game have changed. Right? And with that, you've had the Venezuelan ambassador to the UN urging the Security Council to demand the release of Maduro and his wife and beheading. If the kidnapping of a head of state, the bombing of a sovereign country, and the open threat of further armed action are tolerated or downplayed, the message sent to the world is a devastating one, namely that the law is optional and that force is the true arbiter of international relations. And with all this, while Russia and China have condemned the US's actions, you have many analysts saying that they may be the countries more than any others that see this as an opportunity. Or with one expert at the Brookings Institution saying, if we have the right to be aggressive in our own backyard, why can't they? And to that point, you've had the former Russian president saying, let's put it bluntly, now they have no grounds, even formally, to reproach our country. That said, it's not like that stopped Russia so far, but also as far as China, they haven't invaded Taiwan yet. Though you have some arguing that because of this, that has become now more likely. For example, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace arguing, seeing the international community accept the recent US actions almost certainly reinforce Beijing's belief that a move against Taiwan would be far easier for the world to swallow. Though with that, some have also argued that Trump's actions in Venezuela actually won't have any real impact on China's calculations regarding Taiwan. The one big reason with that being that an attack would likely be more costly, especially since the aim would go beyond kidnapping its leader. But at least regarding China, I'll say that the big kind of thing that I'm looking at is when Xi and Trump are supposed to meet in April. If that gets canceled, I think all bets are off, but I think right now the Chinese are trying to do some calculus, or maybe more in a wait and see position regarding what happens in Venezuela first. But, with everything we just talked about, I gotta pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts, opinions, and reactions? Please let me know them in the comments down below. There was a lot of moving pieces, a lot of craziness, but I always really love to see where your mind's at. And then there's more news we've got to dive into in a minute. But first, let me say, raise your hand if you've been putting off a dental cleaning, checkup, or literally any doctor or self-care appointment. Because you're not alone, right? Something feels off and the routine's always the same. You Google it, you panic a little, convince yourself it's probably fine, and then you move on until it's not. But, this year, let's do it better and actually book those appointments. I mean, it's so easy with today's sponsor, Zocdoc. Right? Zocdoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you love. Right? I'm talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states. Primary care, therapists, dermatology, dentists, you name it, Zocdoc's got you. Filter by insurance, location, and specialty, and then read verified patient reviews so you're not guessing who you're seeing. Genuinely, I've used Zocdoc myself. I still use it. I love it. I mean, I booked while eating lunch in under a minute. No calling, no hold music, no please stay on the line. And Zocdoc appointments, they happen fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. I mean, you can even sometimes score same-day appointments. And, taking care of your health, it shouldn't feel like a side quest. Zocdoc, it makes it simple, quick, and actually doable. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments. Just scan that QR code or go to Zocdoc.com/Phil to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/Phil. Zocdoc.com/Phil, and this message is sponsored by Zocdoc. But then getting back into the news, can you feel it? Can you feel America getting healthier again? Because RFK Jr. is about to execute a quantum leap in American healthiness.
That's what my mission is, eliminate the politics from science.
So about a month ago, Trump was like, hey, Bobby, look into this childhood vaccine schedule thingy for me, would you? And Bobby, who I imagine was shirtless, working out, but still in jeans for some reason, was like, sure thing, Don. And since then, he's been at work in his office, neck deep in science, maybe, frantically scribbling indecipherable math equations on a chalkboard, or think montage style, with men finally emerging to announce that after an exhaustive review of the evidence, or what he calls evidence, the data just so happens to totally confirm what he already believed. So from now on, the total number of vaccines recommended for all children have been been reduced from 17 to 11, which is also kind of weird because weren't kids previously getting like 80 shots?
You have a little child, little fragile child, and you get a vat of 80 different vaccines, I guess, 80 different blends, and they pump it in.
But anyway, of the 11 shots, it includes things like measles, rubella, polio, tetanus, HPV, chickenpox, among a few other things. Right, and the 6 shots getting kicked off the list are for influenza, RSV, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, rotavirus, and meningococcal disease. Right, and that even though RSV is the leading cause of hospitalization in American infants. And all of this, notably, it comes after RFK's handpicked vaccine advisory panel also sharply restricted its COVID vaccine recommendation for most Americans a few months ago.
COVID vaccines are inappropriate for 6-year-old children who basically have a 0 risk from COVID.
Now, with all this, as you might imagine, the evidence that's been marshaled by RFK and his minions to justify this change, it's been described as questionable. But they claim that despite recommending significantly more shots than any other peer-developed nation, the United States has lower vaccination rates and childhood health outcomes. And you had them citing Denmark in particular because it only immunizes kids against 10 diseases. But you have public health experts refuting that, pointing out that apart from 1 or 2 exceptions, the US vaccine schedule was nearly identical to those of Canada, Britain, Australia, and Germany. And as for the ones that diverge from us, they're often responding to specific conditions unique to their countries. So for example, Japan excludes some vaccines that the US recommends, but it also includes others that the US doesn't, like a shot for Japanese encephalitis. And even in Denmark, they exclude some vaccines, not because they're unsafe, but because they're just too expensive, given that Denmark provides universal healthcare, has a population 2% the size of ours, and a totally different risk profile. But hey, that aside, RFK's health department is insisting that anyone who wants the 6 vaccines that it stopped recommending, they can still get those through the Affordable Care Act insurance plans and federal insurance programs, with a press release clearly stating families will not have to purchase them out of pocket. And at least as of right now, you have many major insurance companies saying, hey, we will keep covering the costs at least through the end of 2026. But also in the meantime, it's possible that GOP-led states follow the federal government's lead, and you have experts worrying that parents might take a cue not to vaccinate their kids. Or you've got the chair of the Infectious Disease Committee at the American Academy of Pediatrics saying, unfortunately, it's becoming increasingly clear that we can no longer trust the leadership of our federal government for credible information about vaccines, and that's a tragedy that will cause needless suffering. But also, that's not where it ends, because totally overhauling the decades-old vaccine schedule is not the only way that RFK is making America healthy again. And that is because reportedly, RFK's health department is planning to freeze $10 billion in funding for 5 Democratic states. We're talking New York, California, Illinois, Colorado, and of course, Minnesota, the site of the whole Somali Medicaid fraud scandal.
Every one of them should be forced to leave this country, including Ilhan Omar.
Right, in this move, after the White House froze $185 million for Minnesota daycare centers last week. The $185 million obviously seems much smaller to a $10 billion cut. And as far as this cut, it includes $7 billion for the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, which provides cash assistance to households with children. Also, nearly $2.4 billion is for the Child Care Development Fund, which supports child care for working parents. And then around $870 million is for social service grants that mostly benefit children at risk. All of which could just leave hundreds of thousands of low-income households cut off from aid that they rely on to survive. Now, with that, if you ask the Trump administration, they claim that these cuts are necessary because Democrats in all 5 states have just allowed fraud to run rampant.
We're not going to pay them, and we're not going to pay California, and we're not going to pay Illinois with that big slob of a governor that they have.
But here's the thing, while people have been indicted for what appears to be genuine fraud in Minnesota, there's no evidence as of yet that the other 4 states have suffered anything similar. In fact, even for Minnesota, the alleged fraud allegations, they're not new, right? They were first investigated and charged by Biden's DOJ. And it's not even clear yet that the specific fraud that's been alleged in that viral video put out over Christmas by the right-wing YouTuber Nick Shirley actually happened. Or because despite all the dramatic clips of him aggressively confronting random Somalis.
Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going. Answer the question, are there children? There's no children inside this building.
You have experts noting that he's presented little in the way of concrete evidence. When state investigators visited the daycare centers spotlighted in the video, reportedly they were all operating as expected. But regardless, all of that then brings us to Minnesota's governor, Tim Walz. Because in just a year, Walz went from running to be vice president of the United States to announcing yesterday that he wasn't going to seek re-election. With him saying in a post announcing his decision, Minnesota has to come first, always. Today, I'm proud of the work we've done to make Minnesota the best place to live and raise kids. With him then going on to mention how widespread fraud in the state has become a major problem. Though also more than a fiscal problem, with Walz adding that we now see an organized group of political actors seeking to take advantage of the crisis. Adding, I won't mince words here, Donald Trump and his allies want to make our state a colder, meaner place. Saying we've got Republicans here in the legislature playing hide and seek with whistleblowers. We've got conspiracy theorists, right-wing YouTubers breaking into daycare centers. We've got the president of the United States demonizing our Somali neighbors and wrongly confiscating childcare funding Minnesotans rely on. Saying it's disgusting and it's dangerous. Right, and the rest of the statement touching more on how the Trump administration has canceled child care payments to Minnesota in relation to allegations of widespread fraud across the state, with many on the right blaming the Somali community there. And it appears clear from the statement that Walz is placing a lot of emphasis on the recent fraud scandal that's rocking the state. Though again, we've seen a lot of pushback. I mean, more recently against the video, there are allegations that he purposely went outside of business hours to misrepresent the situation. Others noting that while fraud in Minnesota has been a problem, it's been one that Walz and even the Biden administration tried to tackle by arresting people and charging them. Or one of the biggest rings was actually busted before Trump took office again, and while it did have Somali defendants, the ringleader was actually a white lady, which is a fact that MAGA often ignores. Also with this, as far as reactions to Walz saying he's not going for re-election, you had Trump saying Minnesota's corrupt governor will possibly leave office before his term is up, but in any event, will not be running again because he was caught red-handed along with Ilhan Omar and other of his Somali friends stealing tens of billions of taxpayer dollars. And then adding, I feel certain that the facts will come out and they will reveal a seriously unscrupulous and rich group of slimeballs. So then on the left, he largely received praise from fellow Democrats. Gavin Newsom saying Tim Walz is a man of character, strength, and compassion, saying he has served Minnesota with heart and dignity, saying Minnesota and America is better off thanks to his lifelong public service, as well as Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar praising Walz, saying he has always dedicated his career to delivering for Minnesota, from providing school breakfasts and lunches to our kids to passing gun safety legislation to maintaining our state's AAA bond rating. He is a true public servant. And Klobuchar, she's also interesting because she's reportedly considering running to be governor. And I'll say whether it's her or someone else, it is going to be one to watch, maybe like a train wreck. Because as far as the Republicans, there are 11 candidates, and it includes the My Pillow founder. I mean, 2026 is going to be quite a year, y'all. And then there's more you need to know, more we need to dive into in just a minute. But first, let me take a second to sponsor myself, because right now over at beautifulbastard.com, we are restocked with our signature collection and revamped prints. Right over the break, we were working with our manufacturers not only to make sure that the shirts and the hoodies, they were top notch, but also that the prints on them were even better. Really vibrant, longer lasting, even when you don't follow the washing instructions like I don't. And so right now you can snag our new Thriving gear. For me, it's a sarcastic wear, along with our Emotionally Exhausted line, God is Testing Me and I Refuse to Study, a Silly Goose in This Economy, and even more. And to celebrate the new year, our first week back, if you use coupon code 2026 at checkout, you'll get 26% off. All, of course, at beautifulbastard.com. But then, diving into more news you need to know, Hilton has gone woke and is refusing to provide rooms for ICE agents. That was this major narrative that was going around online as, ICE is making headlines for their increasing presence in Minnesota. But the truth is, right, the reality is that Hilton's not really making the big political stand that your For You page is really suggesting. I'll explain, right? So all of this, it started yesterday when the Department of Homeland Security posted alleged email screenshots from Hilton properties in the area, including a Hampton Inn in Lakeville refusing service, saying, after further investigation online, we have found information about immigration work connected with your name and will be canceling your upcoming reservation. And we are not allowing any ICE or immigration agents to stay at our property. If you're with DHS or immigration, let us know, as we will have to cancel your reservation. Please pass this info to your coworkers. And so DHS, they were livid, writing, no room at the inn. Hilton Hotels has launched a coordinated campaign in Minneapolis to refuse service to DHS law enforcement. This is unacceptable. And the reactions you saw online, they fell very much along party lines, right? Some applauding Hilton, arguing that DHS deserves this, that ICE agents should be refused rooms, but then others taking DHS's side, thinking that Hilton is discriminating against ICE. And then, as far as their part, you had Hilton not confirming the validity of the emails, but you did have a spokesperson responding to the situation, retelling multiple news outlets that the hotel in question is independently owned and operated and that the actions did not reflect the company's values. And with that, explaining, we have been in direct contact with the hotel and they have apologized for the actions of their team, which was not in keeping with their policies. Hilton's position is clear. Our properties are open to everyone and we do not tolerate any form of discrimination. Within the hotel's management company, Everpeak Hospitality, also issuing an apology and saying that it had reached out to those impacted to make sure that they are accommodated. However, you had a DHS spokesperson saying that the matter had not actually been addressed and neither ICE or DHS had heard from the hospitality group about the reservation. And then conservative media personality Nick Sorter went to the location in question and claimed that the hospitality group straight up lied in its statement and that no policy changes had been made, with him even sharing a video of a hotel worker saying,
we're not accepting people from immigration, ICE agents, DHS into our property. It's just the management ownership.
And so that then ignited the backlash even further on the right. And Hilton released a statement early this morning saying that they are dropping the hotel. Writing, the independent hotel owner had assured us that they had fixed this problem and published a message confirming this. But then adding, a recent video clearly raises concerns that they are not meeting our standards and values. As such, we are taking immediate action to remove this hotel from our system. Hilton is and always has been a welcoming place for all. And so then with all this, you had everyone kind of switching the reactions again, right? The people who were applauding Hilton for denying ICE agents rooms, walking that back, criticizing the company, and then those who were criticizing the company saying, oh, it was just one woke branch, and saying it's great that Hilton's cutting ties and making this statement. But that, my friends, you beautiful bastards, is where today's Tuesday Philip DeFranco show is gonna end. Thank you for watching. I love yo faces, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow. We're back on that daily grind.